A system designed to prevent rare catastrophic events has a strange side effect. It must treat everyone as a potential edge case, even when almost all participants are statistically irrelevant to the threat model. And the unsettling part is how smoothly people accept that trade-off the moment the stakes are framed as invisible but absolute. By 2026, airport security is no longer just a checkpoint. It is a behavioral filtration system built on probability compression, where vast numbers of harmless interactions are subjected to identical scrutiny because the cost of missing one anomaly outweighs the inefficiency imposed on millions. What most explanations get wrong is assuming it is about catching bad actors. In reality, it is about managing uncertainty under constraint, where cognitive bias, risk aversion, and institutional authority converge into a single procedural machine. And this is where psychology starts to break down. Because the moment a passenger enters the system, autonomy is quietly replaced by scripted compliance. Instructions are not negotiated, they are followed. And that shift triggers authority bias automatically, even in individuals who intellectually recognize the structure as arbitrary. But what makes this even more unusual is how ritualized the process becomes. Removing items, separating liquids, stepping through scanners, these are not just security measures, they are behavioral conditioning sequences that reduce variance in human behavior, making anomalies easier to detect through contrast. And this detail changes everything. Because predictability is not just a convenience here, it is the detection framework. The system relies on standardized behavior so that deviations become statistically visible, turning human uniformity into a scanning substrate, which leads to a far darker mechanism. Every checkpoint operates under asymmetric risk logic. A false positive is inconvenience. A false negative is catastrophe. That imbalance produces a structural bias toward overscrutiny, even when evidence of threat is minimal, because loss aversion dominates institutional decision-making. And researchers notice something unexpected. Most delays are not caused by threats, but by optimization attempts. Each layer of screening is added to reduce theoretical risk, but each layer introduces new friction points that generate their own secondary risk categories. This is where cognitive dissonance enters quietly. Because passengers simultaneously believe the system is both excessive and necessary, that contradiction is resolved by outsourcing judgment to authority, reinforcing compliance even when personal experience suggests inefficiency. But what makes this even more unusual is how queue dynamics begin to shape perception of fairness. A long line does not just represent waiting time, it becomes social proof that the system is working, because visible congestion signals seriousness, even if it is structurally a byproduct of bottleneck design. And this detail changes everything, because perceived security and actual security begin to decouple. The system becomes optimized for visible rigor rather than measurable effectiveness, since human trust responds more strongly to procedure visibility than statistical performance, which leads to escalation inside the structure. Modern scanners and screening technologies introduce machine authority bias. Once a system outputs a classification, human operators are statistically more likely to defer, even when ambiguity is high. The machine becomes a second layer of perceived objectivity, even though its outputs are probabilistic rather than definitive. And this creates a subtle feedback loop. The more authority is delegated to systems, the more human judgment becomes procedural confirmation rather than active evaluation. But what makes this even more unusual is how passenger behavior adapts over time. Frequent flyers begin to optimize for throughput efficiency, learning micro-strategies to reduce friction packing habits, clothing choices, timing patterns, all shaped by repeated exposure to institutional constraints. And this detail changes everything again, because the system begins to shape behavior outside its physical boundaries. People start designing their pre-travel routines around checkpoint logic, effectively extending the security system backward into everyday life without direct enforcement, which leads to a hidden network effect. As more individuals adapt, baseline expectations shift. What once felt intrusive becomes normalized. New passengers are no longer reacting to the system itself, but to a socially reinforced version of it, where compliance is already assumed. And researchers notice something even more counterintuitive. Most frustration is not caused by delay length, but by unpredictability. When wait time variance is high, perceived fairness drops sharply, even if average time remains constant, because uncertainty triggers disproportionate cognitive stress. This is where psychological friction accumulates silently. Because uncertainty is treated by the brain as potential threat, even when rationally understood as harmless. That mismatch between perception and reality keeps stress levels elevated in otherwise safe environments. But what makes this even more unusual is how security narratives reinforce acceptance. The more abstract the threat becomes, the more absolute the compliance feels. Invisible risks justify visible control structures, even when those structures cannot directly target the source of risk with precision. And this detail changes everything again. Because the system is no longer just filtering people. It is filtering behavior, expectation, and acceptable variance in human unpredictability. It turns chaos into categories, and categories into procedures, until the original problem becomes secondary to managing the system built to solve it. Which leads to the final layer. Airport security does not need to be perfect to function. It only needs to be believed. The entire structure relies on trust and layered uncertainty management, where passengers never see the full risk model, only the rituals designed to represent it. And once you recognize that, every cue, scanner beep, and tray inspection stops feeling like protection and starts looking like a distributed psychological agreement where everyone participates because the alternative is too complex to simulate in real time. So the next time a bag gets pulled aside for secondary screening, the real question is not what was detected, but how many invisible assumptions had to align for you to believe nothing else needed to be?